Você, você, você. Você, você, você.
Hello, you are tuned in to the podcast Arrays of Living, a complete space where we dissect the intricacies of our world. And today we're tackling a topic that hits close to home for many of us. Have you ever noticed how easy it is for society to point fingers? Well, in this episode, we are diving deep into the world of finger pointing narratives, unraveling the threads of blame, throwing over the fence tendencies that literally weave through our culture. From the blame game in politics to interpersonal conflicts in our daily lives, we'll discuss why pointing fingers seems to be a default reaction. So buckle up as we explore why we love to point fingers and the impact it has on our relationships, politics, and everything in between. To start, let's first look at what exactly is meant by finger pointing narratives. There's no point in going into the discussion if we don't even understand that. Well, simply put, it refers to situations where individuals or groups assign blame or responsibility for a problem or a negative outcome to someone or something else. Who hasn't experienced this? It's a blame game that at its core involves deflection of accountability. And those doing it omit, bypass, circumvent taking responsibility or seeking constructive outcomes. Oh my goodness. So let's dive in. I want you to listen, because I'm about to give you 7 relatable examples that outline what it entails and how it plays out in our everyday lives. And I emphasize every day. And as you listen, I want you to have a hooting good time, have fun, noting how many of these examples resonate with each of you. Number 1, relationships. Who knows about this? A partner forgets their anniversary, and the narrative that gets created is they blame the other for not reminding them or not making the day extra special, rather than just apologizing. The impact is you arrive at a strain in the relationship by avoiding the accountability of it, and you only end up creating tension. Why? I ask. Why? Oh, those forgotten anniversaries. Example 2 is workplace oriented. A team member misses a project deadline and blames the delay on another team member, or another team, or just plain external factors rather than acknowledging their responsibility in it. And what's the impact? It can lead to a lack of trust among the teams, among the team members, and it can hinder fluid collaboration. That's what we want with team play, good collaboration. Why introduce stuff that isn't going to do that? But here we are, because we spend so much of our time in the workplace. I'm going to give you another workplace example. The company can't find quality workers and workers that match their knowledge needs. And the narrative in this case becomes it's a skill gap issue, rather than the recruitment process or compensation models actually being flawed. In other words, it's a leadership issue. And the impact of that, sadly, is the company leaders actually miss opportunities to address underlying core problems internally and huge gaps. That gets missed. Their attention is redirected to something completely different that really never gets to the core issue. Oh, what a loss that is. And then example number 4 is going to be a political one. How can we have this discussion and not talk about the political finger pointing narratives? So listen to this one. Instead of taking responsibility for a policy that failed under their administration, politicians point fingers at the opposition and start claiming that the opposition sabotaged the initiative. And what's the impact of that? Contributing to divisive political environment. And we're living that now. Look around the world. We are living divisiveness in politics. On top of that, it hinders progress and it erodes or breaks down public trust. Sounds familiar? Sounds familiar. Example number 5 are around social issues. So let's pull the environment as a point of attention on this one. So companies blame the environmental activists or something else for hindering economic growth instead of acknowledging that their role is in the pollution and resource depletion. They're playing a role in that, but rather than acknowledge that, they blame others. And the impact of that is delaying or halting efforts to actually find sustainable solutions and actually dealing with the real environmental challenges. And then example number 6, again, the discussion would be incomplete without examples of everyday situations. So let's say we're living in a shared situation, which most families are, or roommates are, or students are, what have you, but you're in a shared arrangement.
If you're looking to advertise with Jenn Drakes, check the links in the description or reach out to us at jen@youareworthmore.co.
And the kitchen is always messy. And what it does is it leads to someone blaming others in the home for that messy kitchen rather than taking responsibility for their own contributions to the mess. Teenagers, hello, are the teenagers around? Do I hear anybody coming into the messy kitchen to help clean it up? Oh, wow, this is only my 4th time in the week cleaning up the kitchen. Sounds familiar? The impact of that is resentment and strained relationships. And that can really make the whole space you live in toxic and unbearable to even come into, furthermore, live in. And who wants that? And the last example is around sports. So let's say a sports team loses a game and the players or even the fans starts to blame the referee, weather conditions, or other external factors, rather than actually reflecting on their own performance. And the impact of that is it hinders or prevents the team's ability to learn and improve as a wholesome team. It starts to create tensions in the team, possibly. And the whole point of sports is team play. You want to augment positive team play. And this doesn't help that along. Now, in calling out all these everyday scenarios, and I'm sure more than one of them resonated with those listening, it becomes evident that there's more to it than meets the eye. Humans, yes, we are humans. Hey, humans. And as humans, we seem wired for playing the blame game. And the behavior is complex. We see that. This is complex stuff. It's not always done with us being aware that we're doing it. Ego steps in a way. However, we self-identify ourselves, whatever our identity. And many of us hold our identity mainly around our work or our skills or something like that. So this is complex. And understanding the actual psychological underpinnings of finger pointing is a crucial step in this discussion. We cannot truly have this discussion without looking at what's behind it or what could be behind it. So tell me, what psychological mechanisms are at play when we do this? You can comment on it. You can email me once you've listened. What are some of those things? Now, I'm going to call out a few, just a few, but I assure you there's way more, just way more. Let's look at the first one, the fear of consequences. Yeah, you heard me right. The fear of consequences. Now, in our minds, pointing fingers becomes a shield against potential negative outcomes like criticism or even losing one's job. And for kids, this is a critical one. Kids do this all the time when they're young. They will point fingers so they don't end up on timeout, or so they don't get a spanking, or so they don't get detention. Right? So what we're actually doing when we have this motivation behind it is we're deflecting the blame elsewhere as a way to avoid the discomfort that comes with admitting we've made a mistake. We messed up. Oh, to admit that gives us discomfort. And we are not wanting to get into consequences, so we point fingers. The second motivation is maintaining a positive self-image. You heard me, right? Maintain a positive self-image. Pointing fingers allows us to construct a version of reality where we avoid feelings of inadequacy. Nobody wants to feel that way. And when we point fingers in this situation, we get to protect and preserve the idea that we're competent and flawless. Do you hear that P word, perfection? I'm certainly a recovering perfectionist. I probably pulled a couple of these ones. And by pulling that finger pointing tool that we have, it results in maintaining our self-esteem. Yeah, I'm not scared to tell you I probably had poor self-esteem many years ago, because I can say some of this is probably familiar to me. And then the next one is preserving our social standing, preserving it. We worked hard. We got to a certain place in life. We want to preserve that. And this is motivated by the need to avoid looking bad in front of others, to fit in and be accepted by our peers. Who's in this thing day after day on this level? Teenagers. Teenagers have a lot of peer pressure. So this comes into play for them. And they're driven to protect their reputation. And when you do this, this is exactly what you're doing. You're looking to protect your reputation. Pointing fingers becomes a social survival strategy. And we want you to recognize in this awareness that they are deeply rooted in our instinct for self-preservation. I'll repeat that. Finger-pointing narratives are deeply rooted in our instinct for self-preservation. And coming into awareness, like making it part of your focus and really starting to see when it's happening and when you're doing it. Because I always say clean up your front door before you go cleaning up others. So when you notice you're doing it, the recognition of it should not land on making them excuses, meaning saying, I couldn't help it. Or, I never. No. Once you get into awareness, once it's seen, it can't be unseen. So this podcast is bringing your awareness to it. And through acknowledging and understanding some of the motivations behind it, we need to also accept that it's human nature. It's how we're wired. It's simply a first step. The second step is choosing to transcend the behavior, choosing to do things differently, choosing to manage to what magnitude this is done. How often do some of these emotions come up and feelings come up and you react by finger pointing? And why transcend the behavior? Why? Why would you want to? You're saying in your mind, it's not harming anybody. It actually is doing a lot of harm. And that was a deliberate but. Why? Because, as I said, there are real world consequences when you act on these motivations. One of the most prevalent outcomes is creating divides within our communities, within our homes, within our friendships. And we see this from political landscapes to social circles. Finger-pointing narratives have a way of amplifying differences and driving wedges between us. And in today's world where we are going into this fundamental transition of consciousness, of wanting better for ourselves and the world as a whole, there is no appeal, none, to live in a world where blame is pervasively the currency of conversation and finger pointing is the national pastime or the international pastime. There's no appeal for it. And the everyday examples I called out, they showed how finger pointing narratives redirect our energy and focus elsewhere. And many times away from the core issues that truly require our attention. Finger pointing can delay and even halt progress. We don't want to be halted. We're not meant to be stagnant. Human beings aren't meant to be stagnated. So we don't want to halt progress. Furthermore, finger pointing can create false or detrimental social constructs. It really can. And every day we are living out the impact of one or more finger pointing narratives in our lives. That's our reality. It's happening every day. We're living it. We're feeling the impact of this behavior. And quite frankly, the energy drain is like a running tap. Think of just opening a faucet on full and the water just pouring out and you never shut it off. And I don't know about you, but for me, that tap needs to be turned off with hopes that we can find a way out of this blame-filled maze, because it's a maze. It truly is. And it's complicated. And it requires each of us as individuals to recognize to what degree are we contributing to it. Can we do an about face? Can we turn the tides differently to create management of it? To recognize when we are going that route, to be able to say no and step up and own our shit. Step up and say, no, I made a mistake, or I was wrong, or sweetie, I am sorry. Or say the policy had this intent and in reality when we went to execute it, it had this different impact that didn't go where it was first envisioned. Can we turn off the tap on finger pointing and building out narratives and stories just to keep us preserved? Can we? You've been listening to another episode of Arrays of Living, and this episode was Finger Pointing Narratives. And if you loved it, pass it through your family and friend network by sharing the love. That's how we grow. Share the podcast.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Arrays of Living. If you've enjoyed this episode, check the links in the description for the other episodes, or tune in next week for the next episode.